Listen closely. I'm going to tell you something your mother never warned you about. Something your father knew but couldn't articulate through the bourbon haze of his third divorce. There's a theater inside every man's chest, and we've all been performing the same tragedy since we learned to walk upright. The exhausting pantomime of desire, that sweating, desperate dance where we mistake our hunger for our identity. Picture this. A man stands before a mirror at 3 a.m., practicing how to seem interesting at tomorrow's date. He rehearses stories, adjusts his posture, Googles conversation starters that make you memorable. Meanwhile, across town, she's already forgotten his name, scrolling through 17 other messages from 17 other performers, each one more desperate than the last to prove they're worth the price of admission to her attention. You know what Schopenhauer whispered to his poodle while dying alone in Frankfurt? Desire is a contract you sign with your own disappointment. The old pessimist understood something we've forgotten in our age of dating apps and motivational podcasts. That wanting is the art of bleeding yourself dry for vampires who aren't even hungry. Here's the grotesque joke. The moment you stop performing, the audience suddenly appears, like moths to a flame that's learned to burn cold. There's a study from Uppsala University, 2004, tracking eye movements and heart rates. People are magnetically drawn to those who seem complete without them. We're wired to want what doesn't want us back. It's evolutionary masochism, encoded in our DNA like a sick cosmic prank. I once knew a man who spent 3 years writing love letters to a woman who never opened them. Handwritten, wax-sealed, scented with cologne that cost more than his rent. When he finally stopped writing, stopped calling, stopped existing in her peripheral vision, she showed up at his door at midnight, barefoot in the snow, suddenly fascinated by his silence. By then, he'd learned to love the sound of his own solitude too much to let her in. You see, indifference isn't a strategy. It's what happens when you finally exhaust yourself into honesty. When you're too tired to dance, too broken to beg, too empty to pretend you're anything other than what you are. A collection of scars pretending to be a person. A ghost haunting your own life, waiting for someone to notice you're already dead. The Hindus have a word, vairagya, the colorless state of mind, desire drained like blood from a corpse. They say it's the path to enlightenment. I say it's what happens when you realize the show you've been performing has no audience, never had an audience, that you've been dancing alone in an empty theater while the janitor waits to turn off the lights. But here's the Machiavellian twist, the dark secret that makes angels weep. The moment you truly stop caring, genuinely, bone deep stop caring, the world suddenly finds you irresistible. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you've become something rarer than gold in our attention-starved economy. Authentic, whole, complete. A closed circuit that doesn't need external validation to keep the lights on. There's an old Romanian folktale about a prince who could have any woman in the kingdom except the one he wanted. A miller's daughter who couldn't be bothered to look up from her wheat. He offered her jewels. She ground them into flour. He offered her castles. She used the deeds as kindling. Finally, driven mad by her indifference, he offered her his crown, his kingdom, his very soul. She looked up for the first time and said, "What would I do with another man's soul when I'm still learning to use my own?" That's the cosmic joke, you see. We chase what runs from us, run from what chases us, like dogs spinning in circles, biting our own tails, wondering why we taste blood. Tell me, when was the last time you wanted something precisely because it didn't want you back? When was the last time you realized you were the miller's daughter, grinding someone else's diamonds into dust? We embalm what we love, then wonder why it stops breathing. There's a sound that dying roses make, not when you cut them, but later in the vase, when they're trying to drink through severed veins. It's barely audible, like silk tearing underwater, like promises breaking in slow motion. I mention this because you need to understand something about love. We're all morticians pretending to be gardeners, preservation artists convinced we're creating life. Have you ever watched what happens to a butterfly in a collection? First, the chloroform. Then the pins through the thorax. Then the glass case, the label with the Latin name. The perfect preservation of something that was only beautiful because it could die. That's what we do to desire. We catch it, kill it, mount it on the wall, then stand back and admire our handiwork, wondering why it doesn't flutter anymore. Kierkegaard knew this. Poor Soren, who broke off his engagement to Regine because he loved her too much to let love make him ordinary. He wrote, "The moment I possess something, it transforms into its opposite. The woman I marry becomes my sister. The friend I keep becomes my stranger. The God I worship becomes my doubt." He died alone, of course, collapsed on a Copenhagen street, mumbling about becoming authentic through distance. Here's what they discovered in Tokyo, 23, studying couples through thermal imaging cameras. Physical proximity literally cools desire. The bodies know what the hearts refuse to admit. That familiarity breeds not contempt, but something worse: comfort. The same neural pathways that fire for passion literally cannot fire for security. We're built for the hunt, not the trophy room. I'll tell you a secret that will ruin every wedding you ever attend. The moment they say forever, the countdown begins. Not to divorce, that's too simple. The countdown to the slow substitution, where passion becomes partnership, where mystery becomes routine, where the person who once made your hands shake becomes the person who reminds you to take out the trash. You know what the ancient Egyptians did with their beloved dead? They pulled the brain out through the nose with a hooked rod, replaced the organs with sawdust and natron, wrapped the body in resin-soaked linen. They called it preparing for the afterlife. We do the same thing to relationships. We mummify them with expectations, pickle them in routine, wrap them in the bandages of security, then place them in the tomb of cohabitation, visiting occasionally to make sure they're still there, still dead, still ours. But here's the delicious perversity. The ones who survive are the ones who refuse to be possessed, the dangerous ones. The ones who maintain their distance even in closeness, who keep rooms in their hearts you'll never enter, who love you like a cat loves, completely on their own terms, apt to disappear for days just to remind you they can. There's a couple in Prague who've been married 43 years. They live in adjacent apartments, connected by a door that's sometimes locked, sometimes open. They eat dinner together 3 times a week. They vacation separately. When asked about their secret, the wife laughs, a sound like crystal breaking, and says, "We never stopped being strangers who choose each other." The husband adds, "Love is a wild animal. Cage it and watch it pace itself to death. Let it roam and it might come back. Or it might not. That's the point. You think you want certainty? You think you want someone who can't leave? Let me tell you about the man who handcuffed himself to his girlfriend to prove his commitment. Within 3 days, she was gnawing through her own wrist like a trapped fox. The tighter you hold sand, the faster it escapes through your fingers. The harder you try to keep love alive, the quicker you suffocate it with your own desperate breathing. Nietzsche said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But we're so terrified of chaos that we'd rather have a dead star we can name than a living one that might burn us. We choose the mortuary over the garden, the taxidermy over the wilderness, the wedding album over the wedding night. When did you last love something without trying to possess it? When did you last let someone see you without showing them who you wanted them to see? When will you stop being a mortician and learn to love like an arsonist, ready to watch it all burn rather than preserve it in ice? Solitude is the only church where God shows up. At 4:17 a.m., when the world forgets to breathe and even the shadows seem exhausted, there's a quality to aloneness that feels almost sacred. Not loneliness. That's for amateurs, for people who still believe they're incomplete. I'm talking about the kind of solitude that medieval monks paid for with their sanity, the kind that makes you understand why hermits' eyes shine like broken glass. Let me paint you a picture. A man sits in an empty apartment, no music, no television, no phone buzzing with notifications from people who want to matter to him. Just silence so complete you can hear your own blood moving through your veins like an underground river. This is his Friday night, his Saturday night, his Sunday morning, by choice. And here's the thing that would terrify you if you let it. He's happier than you've ever been. You want to know the difference between loneliness and solitude? Loneliness is standing in a crowded room, screaming inside for someone to see you. Solitude is sitting in an empty room, finally seeing yourself. One is poverty, the other is wealth so vast you stop needing to count it. There's a research from Heidelberg University, 2024, brain scans of people in prolonged voluntary solitude versus involuntary isolation. The voluntary hermit's brains lit up like Christmas trees, creativity, self-reflection, what they called autobiographical planning. The involuntary lonely, their brains look like cities after bombing raids, dark spots where joy used to live, stress hormones eating through memory like acid. But here's what the researchers didn't say, what they couldn't publish in their peer-reviewed journals. The voluntary solitaries had discovered something dangerous. They'd found the door, the one that only opens from the inside, the one that leads to the room where you keep your real self, the one you've been boarding up with relationships and responsibilities and the endless performance of being human. Schopenhauer, yes, him again, the patron saint of misanthropes, used to walk his poodle through Frankfurt's empty morning streets, muttering in multiple languages to no one. When asked why he avoided people, he said, "I can be alone with my thoughts or in company with others' stupidity. The choice seems obvious." But even he missed the deeper truth. It's not about avoiding others' stupidity, it's about finally confronting your own. You know what happens when you spend enough time alone? Really alone. Not alone with Netflix, not alone with books, but alone with the kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your eardrums like deep water. You start to hear things, not voices. That's schizophrenia. You hear the conversations you've been having with yourself for years, the ones drowned out by the noise of other people's needs. There's a monastery in Tibet where monks take a vow of silence that lasts 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. They call it the Great Retreat. Most people think it's about finding God. The monks know better. It's about becoming God, or at least remembering that you never weren't. I knew a woman once who disappeared for 6 months. No explanation, no forwarding address. When she came back, she was different, not better or worse, just precise, like someone had sharpened her. She'd spent the time in a cabin in Montana, no electricity, no running water, just her, and the kind of quiet that makes you understand why they used to burn witches. When I asked what she'd learned, she smiled, the kind of smile that makes you step back, and said that everyone I'd been trying to please was already dead. The paradox is this: the more comfortable you become alone, the more attractive you become to others. It's like you're emitting some frequency only the desperate can hear. The sound of someone who doesn't need saving, doesn't need completing, doesn't need anything they're offering. You become the void everyone wants to fill, the silence everyone wants to break, the solitude everyone wants to shatter because it reminds them of their own noise. But here's the Gothic twist. Once you've tasted real solitude, other people start to feel like interruptions. Conversations become performances. Relationships become obligations. Love becomes a foreign language you once spoke but can't quite remember. You sit across from someone at dinner, watching their mouth move, and all you can think about is the perfect silence waiting for you at home, patient as death. How long could you last in a room with no distractions and only your thoughts? When did you last spend a full day without speaking to another soul, without consuming someone else's content, without drowning out the sound of your own existence? What are you so afraid you'll find in the cathedral of your own solitude? Every expectation is premeditated resentment. Somewhere in Istanbul, there's a garden where Ottoman sultans used to bury their broken promises. Not literally, though God knows they buried enough other things, but metaphorically. They'd write their failed vows on silk, burn them with frankincense, and scatter the ashes among the nightshade. The garden still exists, behind a hotel now, and sometimes, on humid evenings when the air is thick as honey, tourists swear they can smell something burning, something that smells like disappointment. We all have these gardens. Mine is located somewhere between my sternum and my spine, a little to the left, where I keep every forever that turned into for now, every always that became until, every promise that started with champagne and ended with lawyers. You have one too. You tend it daily, watering it with tears you won't admit you're crying, fertilizing it with the corpses of what could have been. Here's what Nietzsche understood that your therapist won't tell you. Hope is the cruelest emotion. Not hate, not fear, not even grief. Hope, because hope makes you complicit in your own destruction. It's the voice that whispers, "This time will be different," while you walk into the same wall, expecting it to turn into a door. They did a study in Stockholm 25 about something they called projection decay, the half-life of expectations in romantic relationships. Turns out, every expectation you have of another person has a mathematical probability of creating its exact opposite. Expect loyalty? You've just increased the chances of betrayal by 34%. Expect understanding? Congratulations. You've just invited incomprehension to dinner. It's not karma or cosmic justice, it's simpler than that. It's that expectations are contracts you write without the other person's signature. I'll tell you about the cruelest game lovers play. If you loved me, you would know. Know what? That you wanted flowers on Tuesday, not Wednesday? That silence means you're angry, not tired? That when you say I'm fine, you mean I'm dying inside, but I want you to excavate my pain without me having to show you where it's buried. We plant these landmines of expectation, then act surprised when someone steps on them. We create tests they don't know they're taking, then grade them on a curve that only exists in our heads. You want to know the most liberating words in any language? I expect nothing. Not in a bitter way, not in a defeated way, but in the way a scientist observes an experiment. Curious about the outcome, but not invested in it. When you expect nothing, everything becomes a gift. When you expect everything, even gifts become disappointments. There's an old Arabic proverb, trust in Allah, but tie your camel. Everyone remembers the first part, nobody remembers the second. We trust in love, but we don't tie our camels. We hand over our happiness like car keys to a drunk driver, then act shocked when we wake up in a ditch, wondering how we got there. I watched a couple implode last winter, together 7 years. She expected him to propose at Christmas. He expected her to be patient. She expected a ring. He expected understanding. She expected change. He expected acceptance. They sat across from each other at midnight on New Year's Eve, each holding a champagne glass full of different futures, toasting to promises neither of them had actually made. By Valentine's Day, they were strangers who knew each other's passwords. The Buddhists have this concept, mudita, sympathetic joy, happiness in others' happiness without expecting anything in return. You know why it's so rare? Because we're all emotional accountants, keeping ledgers of who owes us what. Every kindness is a loan we expect repaid with interest. Every I love you is an invoice for I love you too. We're all dunning each other for emotional debts that were never agreed upon. But here's the secret that makes angels laugh and devils cry. The moment you stop expecting, you start receiving. Not because the universe rewards detachment, but because you finally see what was always there, hidden behind the wall of your demands. It's like cleaning years of grime off a window and realizing the view was beautiful all along. You just couldn't see it through your own fingerprints. The Garden of Dead Promises doesn't have to be a cemetery. It can be a compost heap, where old expectations decompose into wisdom, where the corpses of what you thought you needed become fertilizer for what you actually want. But first, you have to stop planting new promises. You have to learn to love with open hands, expecting nothing, demanding nothing, promising nothing except your presence. What promises are you still watering, even though they died years ago? What expectations are you nurturing that are actually just resentments in disguise? When will you stop being a gardener of disappointments and learn to love like weather, arriving without announcement, leaving without apology? The strongest men are the ones who stopped trying to be strong. Let me tell you how it ends. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with laughter. The kind that comes from so deep in your belly that it disturbs the dead. The kind of laughter that only arrives after you've cried yourself empty, raged yourself hollow, and finally understood the joke you've been the punchline to all along. Picture this. A wolf, scarred and graying, sits at the edge of a cliff watching the moon. He's spent years howling at it, calling to it, believing that if he howled long enough, loud enough, desperately enough, it might come down and love him back. Tonight, for the first time, he understands the absurdity of his desire, and he laughs. Not a human laugh, something rougher, more honest. The laugh of a creature that's finally free from the tyranny of its own wanting. That's what waits on the other side of the performance, the possession, the promises, the isolation, and the indifference. Not enlightenment, that's for people who still believe in destinations. Not happiness, that's for people who still believe in permanence. What waits is something better. The recognition that you've been taking yourself so seriously that you forgot the whole thing was supposed to be play. You know what they found in Copenhagen 24, studying men who'd given up on conventional success, relationships, the whole masculine performance? Their cortisol levels dropped by 60%. Their creativity increased threefold. But here's the beautiful part. They started laughing more. Not bitter laughter, not defensive laughter, but the kind of laughter that comes from recognizing you've been wearing a costume your whole life and finally deciding to take it off. Kierkegaard, last time I'll mention him, I promise, wrote about the aesthetic sphere versus the ethical sphere versus the religious sphere. Everyone thinks it's about ascending to God, but read it carefully. Read it at 3 a.m. with whiskey on your breath and failure in your bones, and you'll see what he is really saying. It's about the cosmic comedy of taking yourself seriously in a universe that doesn't even know you exist. There's a bar in Mexico City where broken men go to drink. Not alcoholics, those go to different bars. These are men who've been broken by success, by failure, by love, by loss, by the sheer weight of trying to be men. They sit in perfect silence until midnight. Then someone starts laughing, then another, then another. By 1 a.m., the whole bar is roaring with laughter, tears streaming down faces, men holding their ribs like they might crack from the force of finally getting the joke. No one explains what's funny. Everyone understands. I knew a CEO once, built an empire, lost it, built it again, lost it again. Third time, he didn't even try. Started living in a van, surfing every morning, teaching kids to read in the afternoons for free. When I asked him about his transformation, he said, "You know what's hilarious? I spent 40 years trying to become someone important, only to realize importance is what unimportant people chase. Now, I'm nobody, and I've never been more myself." This is the final paradox, the last joke, the ultimate liberation. Strength isn't about holding it together. It's about falling apart so completely that you discover you were never together in the first place. You were always just a collection of stories you told yourself, held together by the desperate hope that if you performed them well enough, they might become true. The wolves who survive aren't the alphas. They're not the betas either. They're the ones who stepped out of the hierarchy entirely, who stopped playing the game, who realized that the pack was just scared dogs pretending to be wolves, that the moon was just a rock reflecting light, that the howl was just loneliness, pretending to be communication. But here's the twist that makes it all worthwhile. When you stop trying to be strong, you discover a different kind of power. Not the power to dominate, to possess, to control. The power to witness. To observe the whole ridiculous human comedy without needing to be the hero or the villain or even a speaking part. You become the audience to your own life, and suddenly, it's the best show you've ever seen. There's a moment coming for you, maybe tonight, maybe 10 years from now, when you'll stop mid-sentence, mid-struggle, mid-performance, and you'll see it all at once. The whole elaborate construction, the desperate theater, the exhausting effort of trying to matter, and you'll laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's so beautiful in its absurdity, so perfect in its imperfection, so human in its futility. And in that laughter, you'll find what you've been looking for all along. Not love, not success, not meaning, but the simple, devastating, liberating truth that none of it matters as much as you thought it did. That you can stop running, stop performing, stop wanting, stop trying. And in that stopping, in that great giving up, you'll finally, actually, absolutely begin. What would you do tomorrow if you knew that nothing you did actually mattered? Who would you become if you stopped trying to become someone? What would you laugh about if you finally understood that the whole thing, all of it, was just a game you forgot you were playing? The wolf stops howling, the moon keeps shining, and somewhere in between, in that silence that's not quite silence, in that space that's not quite space, there's room for something that has no name because it doesn't need one. It simply is, and so are you.